Hello, friends. How's it going? My name's Matt Barr. You listen to Looking Sideways, the podcast where I look at the most interesting stories in action sports and other related endeavours. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoy this episode. I'm in the shed. I was going to say it's like my new shed. It's not my new shed. It's my old shed, but I've set it up to record in. And it's great, especially with the sun shining. Yeah, almost like a little studio, as I think I said the other week. Anyway, I'm back after a week or so off the podcast. It wasn't intentional, that, to be honest. I've been trying to book a lot of the old guests that I've had on the list for ages. And like buses, they've all come along at once after a little bit of a break. So I'm currently at the beginning of a pretty busy few weeks where I'm basically going to be recording an episode every day or two for the foreseeable future. And I started with today's guest, the great Jeff Johnson. Jeff is probably best known for his film 180 Degrees South, although he called it 180 South, which sounded better. A film that saw him travel to Patagonia with Yvon Chouniard and Doug Tompkins in homage to the original 1960s Odyssey that is such a defining part of the Patagonia story. It is on YouTube, that film, on a bit of a shit version, which is quite sad. And I couldn't really see, you can watch it in the States, but I couldn't really work out in Europe or the UK how to watch it other than on this badly ripped YouTube version. But I'd really recommend it because it's a really great film. But there's much more to Jeff's career than this admittedly epic high point. He's a surfer, he's a skater, climber, filmmaker, photographer, journalist. He's another one of them who's had one of them questing, roving careers I like to feature on the podcast. As you're going to hear, his story is yet another example of how a bit of front and a lot of passion can lead you to some extraordinary and interesting places, as the stories of how he got his breaks at the Surfer's Journal and later Patagonia as their staff photographer illustrate, and which we do discuss during our conversation. So me and Jeff first started chatting about a year ago, around the time I did the Jamie Thomas interview. He's friends with Jamie, and I think he listened to it. And we got in touch, and yeah, we agreed to try and meet at some point in the future to record an episode. Then obviously lockdown kicked off, so I gave him a shout to arrange this one. I got to say, from our correspondence, I had a feeling me and Jeff would get on. And I'm glad to say I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, which we recorded in mid-May 2020 using the new podcast protocol of Zoom, and if you me, sending people mics or asking them to get hold of a mic, which Jeff did. And as is now traditional, we had the obligatory half an hour of faffing while we got everything sorted and worked out Zoom. Anyway, we got there in the end, and then we got stuck into this leisurely and, like I say, highly enjoyable conversation about Jeff's life and times. So I'm going to crack on. I'll be back at the end. But in the meantime, here's me and Jeff, Mountain of Storms. Enjoy. So yeah, basically don't touch anything. We should be good.
Yeah, don't let me touch anything. It just goes awry as soon as I do that.
Yeah, all good, man. All good. So, how you doing? You all right?
I'm good. Good, yeah. Yeah, just aside from the technical difficulties, I'm doing well.
Yeah, I think
yourself?
this is like the theme of doing these podcasts now.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You got to go through this little tech side of things. Yeah, I'm good, man. We've got like the annual British heat wave. So.
Oh really? Wow.
Yeah, we hit like 75 degrees today. So.
Ooh, scorching hot.
Yeah, exactly. So no, it's been really nice. It's been good. So yeah, I've been out walking the dog.
Oh, good.
Doing a little bit of work. Yeah,
And where do you live? Where you live currently?
I'm in Brighton on the south coast.
Oh, okay. I've been to Brighton a long time ago. Yeah.
Oh yeah, when was that?
Oh geez, man. Early 90s, probably like 92, 93.
What were you doing?
I was a flight attendant on an airline for like 12 years. And
I actually saw that I watched your it looks like it's some kind of like TED talk or something that you did.
Oh yeah.
Which is online. And there's a great picture actually of you as the
me serving food.
Yeah, you as the trolley dolly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I did that for 12 years, long time. And when I first started, I had a layover in Brighton.
Yeah, right. Because Gatwick's like an hour. No, not even like half an hour away. So
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And so I stayed there. I was actually there for a couple days. It was kind of nice, and then went to Scotland from there and all
Right.
that. But Brighton was a cool town. I dug it.
Yeah, it's like classic
Yeah,
student seaside, music scene,
yeah,
good culture.
yeah. I
Yeah.
could have stayed there longer for sure.
Yeah, it's good, man. It's good. It's like I've actually been here 21 years now, which is pretty wild. Moved there on like a little bit of a whim. I was doing a lot of snowboarding seasons in the French Alps, and because I'm from Manchester originally,
All right.
and it was one of them where I came back from a season with a load of friends. I was like 20, and we're like, where should we move to? Like, I moved to Brighton, and here we are. I didn't really surf at the time though. I was like, because my background's, I got into all this through skating and snowboarding really. Surfing was like a bit of a later thing for me. So at the time I didn't really let's just say I didn't pay enough attention to the quality of the waves as I should have done, because 20 years later that conversation comes around a lot. It's like, why didn't we move down to Cornwall again? Or yeah.
Well, what attracted you to Brighton?
To be totally honest, partying.
All right. Well, you said you moved there in your 20s, right?
Yeah, I moved here when I was 21.
Oh yeah, perfect.
So yeah, it's a good party town.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm super into my music, and there's a lot of live music here. There's a lot going on. So yeah, and it's a good summer spot, definitely.
Yeah.
In between trips to the mountains. Yeah. But you were over in Scotland recently, right?
Yeah. With I work with a brand called Rourke. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but so yeah, they do trips, 2 to 4 trips a year, and that was our trip last fall. No, 2 falls ago, yeah. And it was such a great trip, yeah. And I don't normally mix family with work. I've tried to do that, and it's a little difficult. But
Bit
my
stressful.
wife and I love to think I could, but it's just too tough, especially with a little kid. And so we have a 3 or 4 year old daughter that we brought over there. So I did a family trip in France before the Scotland trip. So we went to Paris and hung out there for like 3 or 4 days, and then went down to Guitry and surfed.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was just such a great trip. And then dropped my family off in London with some friends, and then went to Scotland. So it was just a great couple weeks there. Super fun.
And what do you do with that brand then? Are you like an ambassador?
Yeah. And the two owners, the two Ryans that own it, Ryan Hitzel and Ryan Sirianni, I've known them for 20 years or whatever. They're Laguna guys. They grew up in Laguna, and I met them through John Rose. Are you familiar with John Rose and Waves for Water?
Yeah, I know the name, but I that's about it really.
Yeah, he's an old friend of mine, and I met those guys through John, and they started it basically in their garage in Laguna, probably 2008 or 9, maybe 10, and
right.
So they pulled me on board about a year ago, and yeah, we've been doing trips, and I'll write for them. I'll take some photos. Their main photographer is Dylan Gordon.
Okay.
So when we do trips, he does all the heavy lifting, and I still shoot photos, but it's more or less at my leisure. And so yeah, they're a great brand. They make really good gear, and the trips that they do are just so fun. Like every trip we've been on, they try to combine a lot of different things. Like one trip we did to Argentina, we did a pack trip on horses back in the outback of Argentina, and then we went snowboarding and climbing, and Jamie Thomas, he's on Rourke too, and he did a bit of skating, and so it's
nice.
kind of it's an eclectic bunch of guys, and so we're always kind of doing multi-sport travel, and each of us is getting out of our comfort zone, because usually one of us hasn't done one of the things that we're doing, like.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because I've kind of seen it online, and that brand's got a really nice aesthetic, hasn't it?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
there's a real particular feel to the kind of shoots that you and the trips and obviously the products as well. But yeah, because it doesn't really have a profile in Europe, I don't think. So I think I just knew it from following you and Jamie, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. They're getting bigger. You know, they're growing, but it's kind of, I think it's like it's a gradual, slow thing, and I think that's intentional. You know, they're really careful about their branding and their message, and I'm sure you'll start to see it pretty soon out there. It's especially in this day and age. You know, the surf industry and all those brands have kind of collapsed a little bit, and
Yeah.
so I think there's brands like Rourke, these smaller brands are the ones that are going to start to flourish a little bit, I think. And yeah, it's cool. Then the owners are, they come from traveling lifestyles. Like their parents took them around the world when they were young, and so travel is just pretty much the main component to that whole brand. So it's really kind of it's not easy, but it's a simple way of looking at things. They just do every season for the brand, they just do a trip and they get all their assets from that trip. They do videos and photos and stories and stuff, and then they get all the inspiration for the pieces in that collection, you know, that from that area. Scotland, they did a whole thing on tweed and went to visit where all the tweed's made and all that stuff. So
did
fun.
Did you do the whiskey tours? You must have done. That's that's kind of obligatory up there, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really cool. I'm a tequila drinker, and I love really good tequilas, and I'm not much of a whiskey drinker, but I was on that trip, you know, and I learned a lot about whiskey, of course, things I didn't really know, and I enjoyed some really good Scottish whiskey for sure.
Yeah, oh man, I can't wait to get back up there. Obviously, I'm not going to turn this into a COVID conversation because we've all had enough of them. But like, yeah, me and my wife have been saying, I mean, we could probably travel now, to be honest, but yeah, definitely going to head up to Scotland. I think maybe like the Western Isles. There's on Lewis. I don't know if you know Lewis. There's some really nice. I mean, there's some great waves up there, and yeah, just a lovely trip. I think, you know, it's going to be a lot of UK holidaying, vacationing this year. So kind of looking forward to that. Might go to the East Coast as well and surf up there, and yeah, explore the home country a little bit.
Yeah, you guys got I love Europe. I spent so much of my time in my 20s and 30s traveling to, you know, the South Pacific and, you know, Southeast Asia, just because I lived here in Hawaii and was surfing a lot. And as I got older, I started doing these trips to Europe, and I just wish I did more European travel when I was younger, you know. So I could live in Europe. I just love it over there.
Where would you live if you moved over here then? France.
Yeah, maybe the Basque Coast.
Yeah, it's great.
Something like that. I've never been to Portugal. I'd love to go to Portugal. I've heard great things. And
Portugal, I mean, it's obviously amazing. You know, such great waves and such great communities down there.
Yeah, and just the food and the people and just the lifestyle. You know, the surfing lifestyle there is so different. You know, it's you know, have a little lunch, have a little wine at lunch, go surf again, come back, have a, you know, coffee and some ice cream. You know, like just the food and culture. It's just so great.
But you just moved back to Hawaii, right?
Yeah. We're coming up on a year now. We moved here last June, and it's been really, really great. Like I lived on the North Shore here from 90 to 2004, 2005.
Right.
So I spent quite a bit of time here, most of my adult life, and then moved to California, and I've been there for about 15 years, and I always talk to my wife about moving back, and I've always really missed it because I think when I look back, like I said, most of my adult years have been spent here in Hawaii. Like, you know, the 20s and the 30s, it's when you grow a lot and when you meet a lot of your best friends, and so a lot of my best friends are still over here, and so I always talk about moving back, and finally we just we just went for it. We just decided, and within a month we were gone. So
was that like a, because you just turned 50 as well, right?
Yeah.
Was it a reflective thing? Was it, were you feeling like time to put the final roots down kind of thing?
No, I think like I like the only reason I really left is because I got a great opportunity to work with Patagonia, and I wanted to do something different in my life, and it was a great change that needed to happen. And but the whole time I was gone, I just really missed it over here. For 15 years, I just really missed it, and it just, the stars kind of aligned, and yeah, it wasn't like it just popped up this last year or so. It's been an ongoing thing that I've wanted to do, and
right,
and it just kind of, like I said, the stars kind of aligned. My wife and I were talking about moving here, and as we were talking about it, I get a text from my friend with this house that's for rent, that's available, and I showed my wife the house. I go, look, we gotta go. We just got this text, and so we got to move into this great little house here that a friend of mine, her dad built, and he passed away a couple of years ago. And it's right at Rocky Lefts. You walk out on the beach, you're just looking right into the left, and then you can see Sunset Beach just down, a few hundred yards down to the right. And the house, the guy that built it, her dad, Doug Ackerman, he was a really kind of a renowned architect, and he built everything by hand, everything himself. He wouldn't let anybody help him. And he built the little house that I'm in right now. They call it the birdhouse. And he basically built this tiny 6 feet by 10 foot, 2-story little home that he would live in here while he was building the big house.
Right.
And so now the birdhouse is my office, and the house is really unique. It's kind of like an A-frame, really small, and it's just a cool little place. So when this house came up, these things don't come up that often, especially nowadays on, living on the beach and on the North Shore. It's hard to find these houses. So as soon as this came up, we just put our house up for rent in Santa Barbara and just moved over here. Like within a month,
nice.
we were gone. Yeah. So.
And how's it been? Has it lived up to the memories? What have you found? What you wanted to come back to?
Yeah, the North Shore has changed so much in the last 20 years. It's really, really changed, and I see the changes even more so being gone, because you come back and if you live here during the changes, it's kind of a slower, gradual thing. But when you come back in chunks, you just see how much it changes over months and months and years, and so there's a lot of traffic now on the North Shore. Especially in the summertime over here used to be really quiet. Like, from May through September, there's hardly any cars on the road. It's just so vacant. And that was kind of like a nice time for all the residents here, because you got a break from the crazy winter and the crowds and stuff. But now there's a tourist season in the summer, so there's even more traffic, it seems like, in the summer. So the North Shore kind of doesn't really get a break anymore. It's just nonstop. So the traffic's pretty bad. There's a new thing called turtle traffic down by Laniakea, one of the first surf spots on the North Shore. Somehow all the brochures started putting this beach on the map that you could see turtles, and
right.
Within like one season, all of a sudden you just have this turtle traffic that, a 10-minute drive, 15-minute drive into Haleiwa can be like, if you leave at the wrong time, it could be like a 45-minute drive just to get down into Haleiwa. So that's a little rough, but it's still, I still think it's the best place on earth. I just love to be in the water all the time, and not necessarily for good surf. It's just the access here. There's a lot of shitty days in Hawaii, but there's a lot of shitty days here that I would surf all day, whereas in California I probably wouldn't surf.
Right. Yeah.
So you're just in the water a ton. You go, snorkeling in the summer, you go body surfing, you surf, you ride foil boards, Hawaiian canoes. I mean, it's just endless,
So how old were you when you first moved there?
I moved to Oahu right after high school in 1987. I was 18 years old. My buddy and I moved over here, and we lived in town, right next to Diamond Head, and lived there for a while, and then came back to California for like a year, and then moved back the second time to the North Shore in 1990. And then I was here from 1990 to about 2004 or 5.
Right. It's a good old stint then.
Yeah. It was a great time. The North Shore in the 90s was still pretty raw, still kind of the Wild West, there's a lot of the old guard was still here, and it was definitely a lot heavier scene than it is now.
How's that community taking this new reality then of the North Shore?
Well, you mean are people are they receptive to it, or are they bummed, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's such an iconic place and has such a reputation, and what you're describing is change. So, just interested in seeing how it's going down, really.
It's the turtle traffic. It's so funny. I mean, people talk about the turtle traffic all the time because it really is rough. Like, it's such a shock to just be stopped going to the post office down in Haleiv, and you're just stopped in this traffic, and it's just because people are getting out of their cars, crossing the street, and checking out the turtles. Yeah. It's so rough. So people are definitely really pissed about it, and Hawaii hasn't done much to fix that, or people are pretty bummed on that. But I think for the most part, everybody here still really loves it and really appreciates where we are, and it's I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we were just talking about the traffic, and I go, well, I just spent 15 years in California, living in Southern California, and I go, well, at least when you sit in traffic here and you get out of your car, at least you're on the North Shore, Yeah. In LA, you get out of your car and you're in LA.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, I mean, you're from California, right? So presumably there's a part of you that's quite happy to not be there anymore, to a certain,
and the communities, it's still such a unique place with a lot of characters, and it's definitely more of a family vibe here, whereas in the 90s you had some families for sure, but it was just mostly a bunch of dudes out here, a bunch of guys surfing. So now there's so many kids and so many families with little kids that in the summertime we go out here right at Rocky Point, and every evening it's like clockwork. There's like 20, 30 kids out there playing in canoes and surfboards and boogie boards, and there's families on the beach, and it's really cool. It's really different. It's a lot softer than it was in the 90s for sure. But and I kind of miss that old guard a little bit. But
right.
But it's a cool scene out here. It's totally different now. Returning. I lived here for so long as a single guy on the North Shore, and now coming back with a wife and a kid and a job, and it's totally different. And it's so fun to experience the North Shore now through my child's eyes, to take care of all these. Yeah, and that to me is like I'm just in heaven just watching her check it all out,
Well, there's a nice synchronicity to that, isn't there? To do it in your 20s, like we were saying, partying, whatever you're into, like charging.
Yeah.
30s, go off, do the work thing as you did, really. And then 40s, 50s, come back, bit of grounding. It's kind of the cycle, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've got a good one, like to have ended up back there.
Yeah, I'm so stoked. And when I lived here before, I lived right at Rocky Point, just a couple 100 yards down the beach. So I moved right back into my old neighborhood essentially, and everybody's still here. It's so great.
That's
funny. It's like I never left. I just kind of plopped right back into place,
Yeah.
It was super fun.
Are you working on a book, did you say, when we were chatting over email?
A book? Is that?
Yeah. Is that what you're working on?
Yeah, it's done. I put it out this last fall. It's a skate book that I've been working on for about 10 years, and it's called Way High Kick Turn.
Okay.
And Yeah, it's kind of a passion project that started in 2007. I got an email. It was the first time I'd been on YouTube. Facebook wasn't a thing yet. And so I get this email and says, oh, check out this YouTube thing. So I clicked on the link, and it was a video of all my buddies and I in 1987 skating this backyard pool. And,
Wow.
And there's like 15 guys CC'd on that list, and everybody started scanning their photos and kind of sharing them with the email chain, Facebook
Right.
wasn't a thing yet. So that was kind of how we were doing it. And just the banter and it was so fun, just to all of a sudden see all these photos. But I kept on dragging these photos off into my desktop folder.
Right.
And eventually it went on for months, this kind of email chain. And eventually I had probably 300 to 500 photos from that. And then I went to some of my buddies' houses that were actively shooting photos during that time and collected from them. And so I had, to start building the thing, I had probably 1,500 photos that I whittled down to a couple hundred. And but it took me, 10 years to make this thing, just because I then had to figure out whose all these were. That email chain was gone. All of a sudden,
Right.
I had these photos, and I don't know who took them, where the originals are. So then I had to spend years basically hunting all these down, and driving to people's houses and going through their shoe boxes. And
Wow.
so,
what
so no,
a project.
yeah, it was awesome, and just that was enough for me, just to go visit. It was a great excuse to go visit all my friends and catch up
Yeah.
with them. And none of the photos are mine. It's all I wasn't shooting photos back then. So I just curated this whole book, and it's really interesting because the early photos, it's basically from 1975 to 1989. It's a skate scene in the East Bay of San Francisco, and the early photos are really unique because they're shot by somebody's mom or dad with a little point and shoot.
Yeah.
Or somebody's kid sister or whatever. And so they have this really unique kind of naive quality. And then as we got older, some of my friends got real cameras and were shooting, and it's just it's basically a portal into that time. It's the 70s when things were really commercial with skating, and then it all fell apart. And when skating reared its head again, it was it was like the early 80s, punk rock scene, and it was just a really interesting time for skating, and where all of a sudden we had to fend for ourselves. And it was the era of the backyard ramp and backyard pools. And
Yeah, some of those again on that talk you did, some of those ramps you lot put together were hilarious. Like some of those,
Yeah.
some of those platforms. Is that rolling one, right? And I was looking at that, like, I mean, that's just so funny because that's just what you like, innit? You're not worried
Yeah.
about whether it's dangerous or not. You're just like, let's do this. Let's do this. Some brilliant,
Yeah.
some amazing shots, and also just the vision of some of it, like, because there's like a vert ramp that you guys built, right, which is proper.
Yeah, the first ramp the first real ramp. I mean, we had a bunch of smaller ramps and then like little half pipes, and the Thrasher magazine had they came out with some ramp plans one time, and everybody had that out. And so
Yeah, I think it was a little giveaway booklet thing, wasn't it?
yeah, and
Yeah.
but everything was 8. It was really funny. It's 8 foot wide, 8 foot tall, 8 foot transitions, 8 foot of flat.
Yeah.
So we built a couple of those, and but then we finally got permission to. I don't know how we got permission, but we built this ramp on this our friend's tennis court, and it was huge. It was it was 32
That's
feet.
hilarious.
It was 32 feet. Wait, 20 feet wide, 24 feet wide, I think. 9 foot high, like a foot of vert, 8 foot transitions. It was huge, and it. We stole all the wood, and we ended up getting caught stealing some of the plywood, and we all got thrown in jail cells and stuff, and it was crazy. But I look at that, I was looking at pictures, I'm like, man, we were just like 16-year-old, 15, 16-year-old kids building this, and we didn't have any help from our parents or anything, and pretty pretty big job for kids to pull off a ramp that big and
right,
and build it properly, so that was kind of the first one.
And to persuade whoever owned that tennis court to let you put it on there.
Yeah, I have no idea. And we're all lying. People are, the parents are going, "Where's this wood coming from?" And like, "Oh, my dad's a contractor and blah blah blah. He's got." And then I'm telling my parents are asking me where the wood's coming from. I'm like, "Oh, Joe's dad. He does this," and like everybody's just pointing fingers. But yeah, eventually we got caught. And,
so skating was your way in then. That was your first kind of introduction to the life you ended up living.
Yeah, skating was a big part of I think there's a big change that happened in my life, like you do when you're 12, 13 years old. You go through this little rebellion, and that was definitely a big part of my life. And a lot of my friends that we grew up with, we look back on those days, and is such it's a time that really affected the way we do things now as adults. It was really such a skating was so different back then. The 70s was kind of this colorful surfing imitation. You had the Z Boys and stuff, but those guys were so far-fetched. They're older guys down in Southern California, but when everything shut down and skateboarding basically died and all the magazines disappeared and a lot of the companies disappeared, when it reared its head again, it was so interesting because the music was different. Punk rock was just starting to come about, and like when you're like a 14-year-old kid, 13-year-old kid, and you hear that for the first time, I think it's hard for kids to realize now how straight things were back then.
Yeah, it's a real common theme on the podcast. This, like how, and I'm the same. You're a bit older than me, but not by much. But I'm 44. I can never remember. 44. So I was like mid 80s when I started being aware of music, and yeah, like it was still genuinely countercultural, wasn't it?
For sure.
When you discovered that music, when you discovered whatever way in you had, it was different from mainstream culture, and it was a way of finding that identity, wasn't it?
Yeah, and at the time you had disco, which is just like this glamorous kind of cocaine riddled world that was just not our scene at all. And then you had like these glam bands, kind of these glam fake metal bands, and you had these big arena rock concerts, and it was just such a weird scene to all of a sudden hear punk rock for the first time. It was totally mind-blowing. It's now you listen to punk rock, you're like, whatever, but at that time when you're a kid that age and you hear that, you're like, what the hell is this? It was so fresh and so new.
Yeah.
And just the styles and everything. I mean, it's hard for kids to realize this, but like, even if a guy had an earring, just an earring back then, that was like a heavy thing, like,
yeah,
and so it was just a different time. But yeah, so that was a huge time for all of us, like a lot of my friends and I, we all played sports, and we basically quit all our sports and got haircuts and skateboards, and just skating was our life. Like and it still is. Like I don't skate as much as I used to, but when I'm driving down the road, I'm always looking at curbs and like, oh, look at that, you could hit that, and like, I still think through the eyes of a skater,
Lifelong habit, that, isn't it?
Yeah, and I still love skating. I follow skating. I just think skaters are some of the coolest people in the world. It's still, skaters are still so hardcore, even though it's grown so much. And I kind of make a claim in the book, I think, whereas I think that dip in the early 80s where skateboarding had a big check, I think that really defines skateboarding today, because I think without that much needed check that it went through, I think skateboarding might have had a totally different trajectory, and because of that dip, skateboarding is still so hardcore,
well, and the influence that skating had on the others as well, particularly snowboarding. I mean,
oh yeah, for sure.
Without that, and then that subsequent influence, that sport, for example, whatever you want to call it, sport, lifestyle, activity, would have gone down a very different path. I think with snowboarding is like a fine line between windsurfing, skateboarding at one point. Thankfully it went skateboarding.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, when I look at, did the research obviously ahead of this one, and one thing that struck me looking at the decisions you've made is there's a lot of like making your own luck in from what I can see, from what you've to follow the path that you've done. You know, there's a story about basically just rocking up at the Surfer's Journal and saying, yeah, you know, hey, here I am. And then the Patagonia thing as well. You kind of made that happen yourself, didn't you? And I wondered if that was a legacy of that skateboarding sort of DIY thing, you know, to have the confidence to do that, because it's not that common really. And those two examples, I'm sure you probably can, I'm sure there's many in your life. It's quite a confident thing to do, isn't it? You know.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because it's there's two things going on there. I think there's one, I didn't do well in school at all, like never. Grade school, high school, tried college, couldn't do it. Like I was a really bad student, probably have some sort of learning disorder, you know, like that
Right.
hasn't been discovered. But so I was really behind in school, and that was a great insecurity, because when you're the kid in class that's kind of behind, and you know, you either become a troublemaker or you quit, you know. And so since I didn't do well in school and didn't go to college, I can only realize this now looking back as an older guy. I didn't know this at the time, but like I think I had to do things differently because I wasn't taking the normal path to begin with, you know. And it wasn't like it wasn't a conscious thing like, oh, I got to do things differently. It's like for survival I had to do things a different way because I couldn't do it the normal way. So I think stuff like, you know, the Surfer's Journal story, there's a little bit of that. Is like, okay, you know, I wrote this piece and I was like, how could I get this in the Surfer's Journal? You know, there's all these great journalists and writers and surfers and stuff that have published articles in there. And like, how am I going to, you know, I have no background in any of that. How am I going to get my thing published in there? So how you
going to stand out, basically, isn't it?
Yeah. How am I going to stand out? And then my dad also was a great influence on me. He taught me this really great work ethic as a kid. You know, he really wanted me to learn the 40-hour work week, you know, and just get up and work really hard, and which he did, but it kind of backfired a little bit because I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that my whole life, you know.
I was going to say, how did he take the way that it panned out then?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, it's funny. It's like I became a surfer and traveled the world, and like, you know, I spent my 20s and 30s basically not working, or half my 30s. But I have a really crazy work ethic, like how you and I were talking earlier. You know, I get up at, you also do the same thing. You get up at 5 a.m. and you just power out all day. So he did instill a great work ethic. But what he told me is, he said, hey, you know, the best thing you could do is just show up. And he told me about, he was a general contractor, and he told me about this kid that showed up this one summer every day, asked them to work. Hey, can you hire me? Can you? And they're like, no. Finally, they hired the kid just because he bugged them so much. and he did a shitty job, and they ended up hiring him again because he bugged him so much, you know?
Yeah.
And so my dad was always like, hey, just show up. And so I always took that to heart. You know, it's like when I wrote that thing for the Surfer's Journal, I basically flew over there and gave him a call, you know, and I said, hey, you know, I just kind of introduced myself. It wasn't like a cocky thing where I showed up, I'm like, hey, what's up? This is my shit, you know, like.
Yeah.
I was really like, hi, you know, I'm in town and I'd like to drop some things by, you know, and I think why that was unique is that no one does that. They just send their stuff in or whatever. So here I was just on their doorstep, you know. Next thing I know, I'm in the office with Scott Hewlett and Steve Pesman. And these guys are like my heroes, you know. Surfer's Journal to me still is, I think, one of the best publications.
Well,
in the
yeah,
world.
I mean, you set your sights pretty high from the
get-go. yeah, exactly.
I was going to go for that one.
Yeah, exactly. And they're my favorite publication. Like, I've been a subscriber from the beginning. I have every issue. I'm such a total nerd when it comes to that stuff. But yeah, it was, and you know, I showed him my stuff, showed him the photos and the article I wrote and everything. And it was just great. I was just so I'm like, who cares what happens after this? I just hung out with Steve Pesman and Scott Hewlett. You know, how cool is that? And then they called me and they said they were going to run it. I think this was in 1999. So that was the first thing I ever wrote. And the first thing that got published. And what I didn't find out till recently, Scott Hewlett texted me or something, and he said that was his first week at work too. So it was both. It was like my first one, and that was his kind of first one too, you know. And so it was really, yeah, it was really cool. I didn't know that about Scott, you know. But
yeah, but you're so right though. I mean, it sounds like your dad gave you really good advice. You know, so many kind of like aphorisms about this, isn't there? You know, like it is about the work, and it's about putting the effort in as much as it is about the spark of creativity or whatever, you know. It is sitting down every day and turning up, isn't it, really? You know?
Yeah, I mean that and that's it's probably happening less and less these days too, with our devices and all that, you know. It's like people aren't going to be just showing up. But if you can just show up, I think that just blows people's minds, you know. I'm here, you know.
So that was the start of I'm going to use the inverted commas, but the career that you ended up with essentially is like well, it's just a weird word to use, isn't it? Because it sounds like it's calculated. But so that was the beginning of the path that you ended up following, like photographer, journalist, which then led to obviously filmmaker, and as we've talked about, the role with Patagonia. Was that the kind of first time you thought, well, there's something in this, I could maybe quit the airline?
Yeah, the you know, I just like you said, none of this was calculated at all. I had no idea I would be doing this. Even when I got that article published, I wasn't like, okay, this is going to be my thing. I was like, wow, that was really cool. Maybe I'll do a couple more of those. I don't know. It definitely kind of put a fire underneath me. And when getting that thing published, you know, I was really excited about possibly doing more of that, you know. But I didn't think it would become something that I would do on a regular basis or even make a living at, you know. And then getting a camera was kind of the next logical step of storytelling. You know, I always carried a little point and shoot with me during my travels, and so I got a camera and just started taking pictures, and I started getting things published, you know, in magazines, and Surface Journal ran one of my first photos, and I just really enjoyed doing it. I just love documenting things, but yeah, when the Patagonia thing happened, it kind of happened simultaneously with me getting more stuff published. I developed a relationship with Patagonia in two ways. One, they were sending me board shorts that I would test, because I was literally living in board shorts, you know, 24/7 over here on the North Shore. Yeah. So I was testing and giving feedback on board shorts and some clothes, and then they were running some of my photographs. I've written a couple stories for them, and then the photo editor there, Jane Sievert, she really supported me. She saw something that she liked in my photography and started paying for my film and processing for certain shoots, which back then was a lot. You know, if you know, a whole day of shooting could cost you $500 in just film and processing, you know.
Yeah, it's a big barrier to entry, that, wasn't it? It's all very well having a camera and an eye, but to actually kind of produce photos was very expensive, wasn't it?
Yeah, and especially when you're not making money to begin with, you know, you're kind of poor as it is, and so that was a big deal, and I really owe her a lot to my career, because she saw something special and fostered that, you know, but I didn't really even consider myself. I still, at that point, this is like the early 2000s. I didn't really think of this as a career or a way to make money. It was just this fun outlet for myself. I found that I had a creative side that I could tap into, and that was really exciting, you know. But by no means did I ever think it'd be a way to make money, you know, or a career.
What do you think of it now? At 50, do you see it as a career now?
Yeah, you know, it years ago, I remember I was filling out some customs paperwork, I think going into Mexico or something, and I had to write my occupation, and I've been shooting, I guess, kind of professionally for a few years at this point, but I didn't really consider myself a professional photographer. I don't know why. But I remember signing that paperwork. I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm a photographer, and so I think it was actually writing it down for the first time and accepting the fact that, oh, I guess this is what I do,
It's funny that, isn't it? Because that's a real psychological giving yourself permission, isn't it, almost? Because I'm the same. Like somebody, I've been doing this podcast thing like 3 years, and somebody said to me the other day, like, as a podcaster, and I was a bit like, well, that's funny. I guess, yeah, I guess so. Like,
well, yeah, you are, and you're
turns
good
out
at it,
I am, yeah.
yeah, and you're really good at it.
It's very kind, thank you.
But I think it's giving yourself permission, but I think it's also, on the flip side, it's kind of shutting other things down too. Like I think maybe there's a subconscious thing where you don't want to get pigeonholed either way,
I almost think it's like a fear of failure. I almost think it's like,
that too, for sure.
It's like, oh God, if I say it out loud, I might jinx it.
Yeah, or if I write it down and tell people I'm a photographer, now I got to really be a good photographer.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, fuck, I might get found out here.
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah, but the Patagonia thing, it sounds like you kind of made the job up though, right? Because you ended up as effectively like staff photographer. Is that the case?
Yeah, it was. I didn't know that. It was just part of my kind of my pitch when the Malloy brothers and I came on Patagonia. My position and the way I pitched it to the CEO at the time was like, hey, you're going to need somebody that wears many hats. This is basically a startup within the company, and somebody that can do a lot of different things. And
so this was when they were trying to develop surf, right?
Yeah. And they had done it. They'd done it like 3 or 4 times prior to us, and they failed every time. And so the Malloys and I came in thinking that we had to do things differently to make this thing successful, And part of my pitch was like, hey, just my photography alone will justify my salary, And I didn't know that. I just assumed Patagonia had staff photographers all the time, and it wasn't until maybe 5 years later or something, they were Patagonia put out this book called Unexpected, and it's like 30 years of catalog photography, and the creative director at the time asked me to write a story about being the first Patagonia staff photographer, and I was like, wait, what are you talking about? And he goes, yeah, write a story about that. It's a cool story. And I go, I didn't know I was the first. And he goes, yeah, you. So evidently I was the first,
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's really funny. But yeah, it's really exciting time for sure.
Yeah, what a gig. Like, what a dream gig. I bet there's people listening to this that are like, oh, because then obviously you get to, it's a green light, isn't it? You get to travel, and presumably also have a creative input, to kind of plan projects that you wanted to be involved in.
Well, yeah, and I learned so much with my time there at Patagonia, like just about the way the company works, the way business works, the way the world works in that arena, clothing, marketing, all that. And of course, Patagonia, they're pretty outside the box with their marketing and stuff. And then I would sit with the photo editor, Jane Sievert, and go through other people's selections, and I really developed an eye because of her. Like we do these experiments where a submission would come in from a climber, like a photographer or whatever, and she goes, look, you go through it and do your selects, and I'll go through it and do my selects. And our selects would start to be on par with each other, or mine on par with hers,
Right.
Just because I was so used to shooting for her and kind of developed her eye in a way. So I learned a lot about photography and everything else. It was just a really, really great time.
I
great
bet.
time at the brand, yeah.
Well, it's 10 years since 180 degrees south, right, as well. So
yeah,
which is kind of probably the thing that you're best known for, in the wider world. So how did that come about? Was that another pitch of yours? Was that an idea that you had?
That's got a crazy backstory. Like, so I lived on the the North Shore all through the 90s and early 2000s, and I shared a house with the Malloy brothers, Chris, Keith, and Dan. And so we all lived together here at Rocky Point. And, seeing those guys, Chris was starting to make a bunch of films in the, I think, mid to late 90s and doing really well at it. And I was, of course, getting into photography and writing and stuff. And I was also getting into climbing at the time. And we were in Ventura visiting Chris's parents. And this girl came up to me that was working with Patagonia named Amy Kumler. And she had this old VHS tape, and she handed it to me. And she's like, look, I think you and Chris should see this. It's going to blow your minds. It's basically been sitting in the Patagonia vault for like 30 years, 40 years. And we're not supposed to watch this film outside the company. She goes, look, I snuck it out of there. You guys got to watch this, and I'm looking at this thing, and it's just an old dusty VHS tape that says Mountain of Storms on it. And so Chris and I go to his parents' house, and we plop this thing in the VCR, and it's basically the trip that Yvon, Chouniard, and Doug Tompkins did in 1968, where they drove a van from Ventura, California, all the way to Patagonia to climb Fitzroy.
Yeah, it's the legendary Motherlode trip, isn't it?
Yeah, and we're watching this and we're going, why has this been sitting in a vault for so long? And it's got originally scored music. It's got little breaks where it says insert commercial here, or stuff, insert ad here or whatever. And it's a full finished movie, and it's basically the Patagonia brand right there, And at this point, we weren't working for Patagonia. This is like around 2000, I think. And
right.
And I wasn't doing. I think I might have been getting some. I might have had a couple photos published with them, but so Chris and I immediately began scheming on making a film, either documenting those guys or kind of something in the same vein where we go and do all these kind of. We surf and we climb and travel and do one of these kind of big epic adventures. And we actually had a rough, kind of a false start. We started in Australia. We went over there and did like a climbing, surfing road trip and filmed it all on 16 millimeter film. But that's still in the can. We haven't seen that footage yet because it didn't turn into the trip that we wanted it to turn into.
Right.
So that was kind of a false start. And then fast forward to 2004, the Malloys and I get hired at Patagonia to do the surf thing. And then Chris and I, we've always talked about that project, but we never did anything with it. It was just kind of this dream, like, hey, let's do this thing, And so Chris, when we, around 2005, Chris and I started talking about it again. We're like, hey, now we work for these guys. Let's pitch this whole idea to them. And, way easier in now that we work for them,
Yeah.
And Chris had gone on and made, during that time, made a bunch of films and doing really well at it. And so Chris made this really great pitch deck and pitched the whole thing to them. And I didn't know where I was gonna like what my part would be in the whole production or anything. I was just maybe I'll shoot photos, maybe I'll write some of the script. I didn't know what my kind of contribution would be. I just wanted this film to happen because I thought it'd be so cool, I'll try to make a long story short, but they got the go ahead and they started to get funding and do all this stuff, and then Chris was getting all these basically these video applications of people wanting to be in the film, like basically casting,
right.
And so Chris is, because we had access to Dean Potter, who was alive at the time, climber Dean Potter. We had, maybe his wife Steph was going to be in there. We get Keith in there, and then we're talking about another surfer. And so we had access to these great athletes. And so Chris came over to my house one day and he was really distraught. And I go, what's going on? He goes, man, this whole thing just doesn't feel right. And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, I'm getting these casting videos for people I don't even know and getting pressure to kind of hire some of these people from the outside world that I don't even know who these people. I know who they are, but I don't know them, And I go, well, you'll figure it out, just whatever. And he goes, well, I think I have the answer. And I go, well, what is that? And he goes, this is your story. He goes, this is like, you and I have been talking about this project for like 5 years, and this is your dream as much as it is mine. And you have hung out with Yvon a bunch, and this is the story. That's the story. And I was kind of a deer in headlights, because I didn't.
Yeah, that's out your comfort zone, isn't it? That's like,
yeah,
it's one thing to be like, hey, I might take some pictures, but to suddenly be like, I think you should front this. That's a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and he goes, I don't want somebody like an actor or somebody polished, and I go, well, you'll definitely not get somebody that's polished in there, So yeah, that took a lot, kind of to it was a big shock to me, and to kind of roll that over took a while. How did you get your head around that then? Because that is a big undertaking. Oh yeah, it was. And Chris we're such close friends, and he goes, and he goes, on one side, he goes, I really hate to do this to you. He goes, because you won't be you'll be more public than you are now. And he goes, I know you like you like where you're at in life, and he goes, this will change things for you a little bit. And he goes, I almost don't want to do that to you.
Yeah.
Because he's done these films, he knows how it goes. And he goes, well, think about it, And so I did. I didn't just say, yeah, okay, I'm in. I thought about it for a long time, and I mean, it even gets crazier. I don't even know if we want to go too deep in the story, but like, I just met this girl.
Go deep.
No, I just met this girl that I thought, was going to be pretty serious, and I was like, man, Chris, I told him, I go, I've sacrificed so many relationships just doing what I do, traveling and just being kind of a surfer derelict, and like, and I go, I don't know if I want to jeopardize another relationship for this trip, and he's just going, I hear you, so I won't go too deep into it, but I almost didn't go.
Right.
And so it got crazy, but then next thing I know, I'm on a boat sailing to south,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow. And it turned out brilliantly. I actually had Keith on the podcast, and I didn't ask him about the climb. It was only afterwards I was like, I can't believe I didn't ask him about that. So quickly, I mean, if people haven't seen it, so basically you drag Keith up. What was the route?
El Capitan. It's the North American Wall and El Capitan.
North American Wall, wasn't it? Which was Yvon put up first, right, in the 60s.
Yeah, he did the first ascent, I think in 64 or something, 63.
And Keith's not a climber.
No, not at all. I've taken him on a couple small little climbs just as like fun stuff to do, but not a climber at all. And basically that decision came from the original Mountain of Storms movie that we saw. And if you watch the 180 South, Chris used a lot of that footage, that old footage from that film. The original film, Mountain of Storms, it's all about sandbagging each other and getting each guy out of their comfort zone. Like, Yvon hadn't skied much at that point, so they take Yvon skiing down a volcano.
Right.
There's a guy on the trip that's never surfed. He goes surfing. They take a guy all the way down to Fitzroy, I think the skier, forget his name. They take him up Mount Fitzroy. He's never climbed before, So I really love that whole spirit of kind of the sandbagging and the, getting out of your comfort zone. So that was my idea, is like, hey, let's start the trip up in Yosemite. It's a historical ascent by Yvon Chouniard. This film is an ode to him, basically. So let's take Keith Malloy up the NA wall on El Cap, And it was I didn't think it was just a harebrained idea. I didn't think it would really take, and I asked Keith if he'd be into it, and he's like, sure, I guess. Like, he had no idea, he didn't know what he was agreeing to, clearly. Yeah, and when he said yes, he finally looked me square in the eyes. He's like, well, is it safe? And I was like, like, what do you say to that? I don't know. Like, is
You're on a rope.
paddling out of Mavericks, is that safe? I don't know. It's like,
I hope you didn't say that.
No. But it was
it's great. I mean, I watched it again the other night because I mean, we were chatting on email and I was like, can you send me a link? And I can only find like a real dodgy ripped copy on YouTube. But I watched it again the other night, and yeah, fair play to him for doing that. I mean, that is pretty punchy.
Oh, I mean, people were just blown away that he even agreed to do that, and he's afraid. He's really is afraid of heights, and which is, I mean, everybody's got a healthy fear of heights, but some people more than others, and he's definitely afraid of heights. So, we're up on that wall for 7 days, So
yeah, I mean, it's not like he could turn around.
Yeah, and he's still. I mean, he would never do it again, but it's one of the greatest weeks of his life. Even though it was just it was a lot of it was horrible, but he got to climb El Capitan with some of the best climbers. Not me, but we had some guys, Timmy O'Neill and Dave Turner, that dragged us up that thing, and he got to sit out a snowstorm, a really nice snowstorm that wasn't windy. It was such a great trip.
Yeah. I mean, when was the last time you watched it?
I don't think I've seen the film in its entirety for years. Yeah, I don't know. I got really sick of hearing my own voice. Like,
you want to try getting a podcast?
Yeah. I mean, now you know how it is, but when you first hear your voice, I don't think anybody likes the sound of their own voice. And then
it's so weird. It's such a weird thing, isn't it?
It's so weird. And so I'd go to all these screenings and have to sit there, and every time the movie would start and I hear my voice, I'd just sit there cringing in my seat, and just like, I can't stand this, but I haven't watched the whole thing in a long time. Yeah.
You should watch it again. I'd be really interested to see what you think, because obviously 10 years is like a good period of time, isn't it? And we talked, one of the themes of the stuff we've been chatting about today is like how your perspective changes, isn't it? And that's such a snapshot, isn't it, for you? That project.
Oh yeah, must be. Crazy point in time,
Yeah. So 50 this year, has it been a reflective time? Is it? I guess it's inevitable, really, isn't it, that you start to take stock a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily the age. I think it kind of also has to do with having a kid,
Yeah, right. Of course.
So I started kind of late in life. Like, I didn't get married till I was 43 or something, and then I had had our baby girl. I had her when I was 47, and now I'm 51. I think having a kid definitely does that. You start reflecting a lot, and especially now moving back to the North Shore and getting to relive all my favorite haunts with my little girl and see things through her eyes. It's definitely nostalgic and all that. But yeah, I think I don't think I'm more I don't know if it's the age or it's probably a little bit of both. Kids have a great way of putting things into perspective for you pretty quickly. Yeah, it's I think moving here, one of the main things is just I just love how good you feel in Hawaii. You're just out and about so much. Like, I have friends that come here on vacation, and after a week they're just exhausted. Because
yeah,
I had a friend come and stay for a while when I used to live here, and I was like, hey, let's go surf. He's like, I can't, man, I'm so tired. And I go, what? You're too much paddling? He goes, no. Just walking on that deep sand on the beach, my legs are sore. Like, just walking, he was just, and it is just such a big part of my life is being outdoors, so that just the access to being outside a lot over here is just, I felt it would also make me a better father, I think, to have so many things I could do with my daughter,
Yeah.
But yeah. I don't know.
And what's the work situation? What you're up to at the minute? Because do you sound like somebody who's always got a project on the go? So you mentioned you're working with Rourke. Is it that kind of thing? You doing sort of still shooting, ambassador stuff? Is that how it kind of boils down right now?
Yeah. Well, I had the busiest year I've ever had was last year. I mean, it was crazy. I was gone more than I would like to be, but it was just a great year, and then I carried that momentum up through this year, and I had, a lot of jobs lined up for this spring, and of course all that went to the wayside because of the COVID thing. But it's been kind of nice. It's been a great break. I mean, just not taking the COVID thing lightly. I mean, it's a horrible thing that's happened, but I think there's some real pluses. I think everybody's going to feel that there's some silver linings there, for sure.
Yeah, well, it's been an opportunity for maybe not on a like a governmental level, but personally, it's just an opportunity to take stock, isn't it?
Yeah,
and to look at your life, and well, a lot of obviously it's been a pretty urgent economic reason to take stock for most people. Like, okay, well, what do I actually need? What's important? Like, what can I live without? And I've certainly found those answers surprising personally.
Yeah,
but then I always knew what they were deep down, I think, as well,
Yeah, and I think that's why you're finding them, is because you already knew,
Yeah, and that's been quite. That I know what you mean about when you the caveat that you said, not to downplay it, but I think that's a real thing, isn't it? That it's quite a strange feeling of almost like guilt about the fact that some of the experience has been positive.
Yeah.
On a personal level.
Yeah.
So you found that personally, then you found that you've been able to kind of reevaluate a few things.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like what we were talking about, skateboarding falling apart in the 80s, how it made that dip, and I think it had to check itself, and I think that when it reared its head again, it was a whole different thing. I think it's similar, like when you have these things happen, it forces you to take stock, just like you said, Yeah, so I there's been some great things to come with that, and I've been, I was on such a roll work-wise that, I got to publish my book, the skate book, which was like an ongoing project for like 10 years. But it was cool to sit down and start, I have all these little things that I've been writing over years and haven't been writing them. And I might start putting out these little self-published books, like these small zines, like these 20 to 30 page little books and stuff. And
nice.
So it's been fun. I've been going through my archive of photos and looking at things, and it's been good. But yeah, for work, I haven't been on a photo shoot for months, because I have to travel for work. So, but I've been doing a couple things here on the island, and doing some interviews like we're doing now. I've been for the Rourke guys. I've been doing these Instagram live chats and stuff.
Yeah. You did one with Jamie, didn't you? Yeah.
And I really that one with Jamie is like, I wanted to go so deep, but we only had an hour, and so we just kind of brushed on a lot of things. I wanted to really go deep with him, but yeah. So I've been keeping busy. I mean, busier than I thought I would.
Yeah. That's great. So how have you found doing those? Because I've done a few of those. It's quite a strange format, isn't it?
Yeah, the first one I did with Rourke was one where I just talked to the phone.
Yeah.
And they said, hey, it was just like me in my office, talking to people and then taking questions, But that one threw me off because I don't do selfies or talk to the phone really, and so that was the first time I actually pointed the phone at my face. And
yeah, same with me. And it's so fucking weird.
It's so weird, man. Like,
yeah, it's like it's the least forgiving format as well. If you're like, I might actually try and do a bit of live presenting, because I mean, not that that's how it came about for both of us, but suddenly it's like, okay, I'm going to do that. To do it in that format is so weird, because I was the same. I was like, I couldn't even physically look at myself on the screen.
Yeah.
And I was having to really force myself to like actually look at it and
Well, and no one's talking back to you, so you're just like you say a sentence, and you're so used to normal conversation where somebody goes, at least they go or or they say yes or whatever, but you're just like talking to yourself, but people are watching you. It's the fucking weirdest thing.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good experience though. It's a good fast track. I did about 8.
Wow.
Yeah, like for Patagonia actually, because I've got the Patagonia podcast that I do, and so over here we did one a week for 8 weeks. Now we're doing one a month on a Friday night.
Oh wow!
And I've got to say, at the end of when we decided to go monthly, I was quite glad. Just because one a week was quite full on, and at the time I was like, whatever, hour a week.
Yeah.
But to do it well was definitely challenging. Yeah.
Well,
not that I'm even sure I did do it well, but
I gotta check those out. I haven't listened to those yet. I gotta listen to those. I didn't know.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. I've saved them all, and this is funny. I keep meaning to put them on YouTube, but I can't bring myself to record the intros because it's one of them where I'm like, fuck, I need to just do this. But I'm going to do it this week, so I'll send you a link.
Oh, I'd love to check it out. Yeah.
So another question that I had, one of the things we've been talking about is obviously, you've got this real long view of the cultures that we're interested in, from skating, as you've described, time on the North Shore. Like how do you see it today? Are you positive about the way things are in I think skate, you said you're still super stoked on,
yeah.
What are your thoughts on, I'm going to say it, the state of surfing right now? I didn't mean to phrase it that clumsily, but you know what I mean, because you have got this real long view of it.
Yeah.
And how do you see it? Are you positive about it? What are your views?
Well, it's interesting. I was listening to the interview you did with Chaz Smith the other day. And,
that one polarized people.
And I'm a big fan of his work. I love.
He's great. I thought he was brilliant. I really liked him.
Yeah, he's awesome, and I love his book. The Welcome to Paradise.
Now Go to Hell. Yeah. The North Shore book. Yeah, it's good.
And he's such a great voice, and I just love that book. And he tapped into so many things, so many subtleties here on the North Shore. That I just loved it. And I love hearing his perspective. But it's funny, I was sitting there talking. You know John Peisel, the shaper. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, I know who he is. Yeah.
He's one of my closest friends over here, and we were talking about Chaz and how the podcast that he does with David Lee Scales, how off they are on all their information all the time. We're going, God, and I think Chaz knows this, and he doesn't care. That's his whole thing,
off in terms of the industry chat.
Well, just so many different things, where you're kind of that is not the right information right there. It's just funny, I'm trying to think of a thing oh yeah, I think David Lee Scales said something building a house like Dan Malloy did, and I'm like, Dan Malloy's never built a house. What are you talking about?
Right.
Little things like that, But Chaz said something on your podcast the other day that I thought was interesting, and where I totally disagree with him, but he said that he was blown away that he thought surfing was this crazy rebellious subculture, and he goes, I guess I've been wrong, and I go, how would you think that? I think it lost its subculture kind of edge years ago. I think surfing has lost that entirely. I'm just saying, for the most part, generally the surf public is totally different than it was, definitely different than it was in the 60s and 50s,
Yeah.
But I don't see it as this renegade, rebellious subculture at all anymore, and I think that was lost a long time ago.
It's a real powerful founding myth, though, isn't it? That that trope that we're talking about, that you identify, that he is got such curious power in surf culture. And I obviously completely agree with you. Those days are just gone, aren't they? They're long gone.
Yeah, and you guys talked about it a little bit too, about the industry has always been really conservative. Surfers are. I agree with Chaz for a little bit, because I kind of built this fantasy around surfing where I still think of surfing as that thing. I love. My favorite part about surfing is these guys you never hear about or see around, and they really are living these lives that are just true characters, and I love celebrating those people, because that I still live in this fantasy that's what surfing is this really unique individualistic lifestyle. But the reality is that it's just not, and the industry is just very telling of that. Like it's just like, it's so, I guess bland is what you can say. If you compare it to skaters, like skaters are so forward thinking and they're so just like, fuck you, we're doing what we want, whereas surfing is a bunch of conformists, and I'm just saying generally,
Yeah, I was going to say there must be some pockets or
oh,
things
for sure. And I think also, like, going back to David Lee Scales and Chaz, like their world that they're living in is that they're kind of the product of Southern California surfers, like the stuff they talk about and everything. It's like, that's kind of the heart of like the culture almost is coming from that little world there, spreading out through the rest of the world. It's like,
yeah, well, that's that I always just think that conversation is self-perpetuating, isn't it?
Yeah,
the more you talk about it, the more you kind of make it real, and that's kind of what they do.
Yeah,
but I think what was interesting about the conversation with Chaz is he just obviously feels a bit trapped by it.
Yeah,
yeah, it's like, which he's almost like he's created a monster, isn't it? He can't really escape from, which is really, really fascinating to hear.
Yeah, you can really hear it in his voice that he's really distraught over it. He's like, holy shit, I thought it was this thing that it's not.
But he's obviously so clever.
Yeah,
he's obviously such a bright guy.
Yeah,
and like such a great writer. That I'm just very interested in what he does next, because because even at the end he gave himself a get out. He said, well, I'll probably still be doing Breach Grit.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, but yeah, like it was funny, that one, because there's it doesn't it has a profile in the UK, that site, but a lot of my listeners had never heard of it.
Yeah.
And I definitely got a few emails that were like, who the fuck is this guy?
And that's what I love. That's what I love about him is he's pushing buttons, and no one does that. There's not a lot of people that do that, especially in the surf industry.
Yeah, he's a provocateur, isn't he? That's kind of the thing. But yeah, I think you're right. It's increasingly a bit of an anachronistic role, isn't it, in the surf? To push those buttons and to kind of be that guy.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's getting quite out of date in a way, isn't it?
It's getting what?
It's just getting a bit outdated. It's almost as outdated as the thing it's trying to celebrate in a way.
Yeah.
Which is I just found it fascinating. I mean, I met Chaz last year when I was in Encinitas, and he was just charming. He was just a lovely guy.
Yeah.
And I said to him then, I was like, do you want to come on the podcast? He's like, yeah. So yeah, and I've just always found that whole thing, like I said at the beginning of our conversation, like surfing was the final one for me. So it's not like I was a grom, like super immersed in it.
Yeah.
So it was like, as I got more and more into surfing, when you get into all that stuff a bit older, obviously you can kind of see it for what it is a little bit more. So I just found that whole thing quite fascinating, really.
Yeah.
That the kind of the founding myths, as it were.
Yeah, it's like they're still trying to tout this myth that it was gone a long time ago.
But I guess that's why I asked you about the North Shore earlier, because it's such an integral part of that myth, isn't it, and that story.
Yeah, and it still kind of exists over here. Like I said, I kind of miss the old guard. Like North Shore in the 90s, I was kind of thinking I was real late to the game because, of course, I've just like devoured all the stories and stuff from the 70s and the 60s and 80s and all that. But it was still pretty heavy here in the 90s. It was still really rough, and you had to really watch yourself. But I loved it. I love that you had to pay your dues, and it took time. You couldn't just come over here and just get into the scene or get waves right away, and there's like this barrier, between you and the surf that you had to kind of navigate, and so I kind of miss that, but the surfing, it's like I try not to I don't like to stick in the past and become an angry old guy, you know, like I still love surfing. I surf every day, and I'm watching the kids surf these days, and it's just mind blowing. And there's some cool shit going on here, you know, like the other day there's this weekend they had a little grassroots surf contest at Rocky Point here, and all the hottest kids in the neighborhood, they're all, you know, they're partying down there. They're drinking beer, smoking joints, and surfing. Right. And they got their, you know, their little funny contests, and it's cool, you know. And yeah, it's like, you can't just look back and say everything's different. Like, I think, you know, once you fall into that, you're just a grumpy old surfer, you know. And
yeah.
So
there's plenty of them around.
yeah, there's plenty of them around. So I'm really positive about surfing and where it is right now, and but surfers are different, you know. There's this one thing that happened when I was living in Santa Barbara that was really telling, and I tell this story all the time. But so this neighbor of mine, she's like probably in her mid 30s, early 30s, kind of an adult learner, like kind of gotten into surfing. And after hearing the story, it's like you find out that this is the archetypical surfer, like. And the story she tells me, she goes, hey, did you hear, I used to live at this one surf spot over there called Hammond's. And she goes, did you hear about what happened yesterday? And I go, no. And she goes, oh, this big guy dropped in on a wave, like a big dude, probably in his early 40s, dropped in on a wave, and some kid, like in his 20s, just burned him. And the guy said, hey, you know, like, you know, hey, kind of let him know, like, he's back to, like, get off, you know. And the kid stayed on the wave the entire time. And then they kicked down the inside, and the guy kind of said, hey, you know, what's up with that? You know, kind of just like, and the kid started mouthing off on him, you know, like started laying into him. So he burns him, doesn't get off his wave, and the kid mouths off on him. So the guy, I guess he broke his fins out of his surfboards and maybe slapped him in the face, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Which is what happens when you do that. If you're a little guy and you're like going to yell at like a big guy, you get your fucking ass kicked. Like, that's just, I mean,
that is definitely, like, if you're gonna do that, there's gonna be some kind of repercussion, isn't there?
Yeah, that's just what happens in life, right? So the kid goes in and calls the cops, and the guy gets to his car, and the cops are waiting, and he gets arrested and put in jail. And she goes,
it's gonna be a tricky one to explain, isn't it? In the cold light of a, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's so. But the crazy part of the story is she goes, "Can you believe that?" And I'm thinking, I can't believe that kid. Like, but she is like,
yeah,
all
she's
for
like,
it.
what he deserved it, basically.
Yeah. And when I looked at her and I'm like, oh, she's in favor of the kid, and I was like, fuck. Like, this. Well,
that is so common though, isn't it? When you surf and people drop in and they genuinely get angry. Like that is so common. I mean, if anyone ever drops it on me, I always just try and explain. Like, yeah. You know, I'm always just a bit like, okay, so what's going on? You know what I mean? Because a lot of the time people obviously just don't know the etiquette.
Exactly.
And the danger, and then also people just get so angry when they get challenged, don't they?
Yeah.
So, but it is incredible. Like the amount of times you get dropped in on, and then people act as if you're the aggressor. It's very odd, isn't it?
Yeah, it's strange, and that was really telling to me that this is the new surfer. Like, we were totally divided there. Like, I thought she was on my side, she thought I was on her side, but like, I was all for the big guy that hit him, and she was all for the kid that called the cops, you know. And I was like, oh, that's the new surfer. Like the old surfer's like, hey, that's what you get if you're a kid, and if you drop in on somebody and didn't get out of their way, and you mouthed off to him, and the guy's bigger than you, you just get your ass kicked. I mean, that's how it works. Like, if you're gonna do that, but you don't call the cops, you know. And so yeah, that was really, I was like, okay, that's how surfing is now. That's so different. Like, surfers, you take care of it yourself. You don't call the police, you know. Like, so
did you try and explain that perspective to her?
No. I realized this, and she's a sweet girl. She was my neighbor, really cool girl. I really like her. But it was so, our worlds were so different at that point. I was like, wow, okay, this is just a totally different world here. Like,
it's a good metaphor, isn't it, for the shift?
Yeah, and I was like, wow, that's okay. So you call the cops now, like, you know, like, it's strange, you know. But But I guess you know, it's good not to have violence or whatever. But I mean, I don't know. There's a line. It's like that's kind of how life is. Like I'm not gonna go like mouth off to some big dude and expect nothing. Like if you do
the
that,
other
you
thing
gotta,
is
like,
as well, like that it is there for a reason. Like
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
it is that there is, and that's the thing. That's what I mean. All piss taken aside, like that's what I mean when I say if someone does it to me, I do just try and say to them like, look, here's why you shouldn't do that, because it's fucking dangerous, especially
yeah,
especially when there's like it's actually good surf.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you're gonna surf today?
Hopefully, yeah. It's the waves are small, but we
Jealous.
it's been kind of I almost feel guilty about what the North Shore's been like the last couple of months, because I haven't even been telling my friends or like rubbing it in their faces or anything, just because I feel so guilty about it. But the North Shore it's probably been the best spring season ever than anybody can ever remember.
Wow.
Like April, which is usually the waves are tapering off in April and getting smaller. It was like huge for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, just giant. Like some days totally closed out. Like, and there's just been, it's been one of these crazy springs. It's a spring that it's what wintertime should have looked like this winter. It's been crazy. So we've had a great stretch of surf, and I think this is the first flat day in maybe a month or two. But so yeah, that's been another silver lining too. It's been relatively uncrowded and good waves. So
nice. Sounds great.
It's been, yeah, it's been driving my wife crazy, because I keep telling her, I go, look, babe, this is, you don't see
the classic. No, honestly,
yeah,
I've got to go again.
You just don't see springtime like this. It's funny, but
yeah.
Anyways, I shouldn't be talking about it. I feel bad because but anyways, whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah. Hey, well, Jeff, that was fucking great, man. Thank you. I'm really glad we got to.
Finally do it. Finally.
Yeah, it's been about a year, I think, since we first had a chat.
Yeah, well, I
did have plans to come over there. I've never been to Hawaii, so
really?
That is on the list when this all, because me and my friend Owen, who takes the pictures for the podcast.
Okay.
We did like a California trip last year. We did an island, like west coast of Ireland trip, and he keeps saying like Hawaii. We got to go to Hawaii. Do a load of episodes.
Yeah, you got to come over here and definitely let me know. We'll hang out.
Man, I'd love to. That'd be great.
It's such a great place, because there's a certain side of the North Shore that people hate. Like, it can be such a scene, but a lot of those people that hate it only come here in November and December when it's just a scene. So it's easy to not like it during those times, but there's so much history here, and there's so many characters, and it's just like, I mean, you walk into these houses that, so many people, like along the coast here, so many of the houses have so much history, and the people that have lived in them, and you see these like pictures on the walls of the guys that have been here before, and girls and stuff. And anyways, I think you just really enjoy the whole thing. It's just
man, I'm definitely gonna do it. So there you go. That was me and Jeff Johnson, and I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, very much enjoyed chatting away across the time zones. And I can confirm that the spot he was recording from was as idyllic as it sounded, and it put my little Portslade shed into some much needed perspective, whether the sun's shining or not. And the fact we ended up chatting about Chas Smith at the end was pretty topical, actually, because like I said to Jeff, I got a fair few interesting messages about that one. And one of them stood out, and I thought it was worth sharing. Here it comes, this week's housekeeping corner. Well, it has been a while. Now, I'm not going to read out the actual email because it was a bit of a correspondence in the end. But the upshot was, this listener felt I was too soft on Chas, and that I should be letting my own opinions come through a little bit more in the interviews. Now, it is an interesting point, and it is kind of related to that old canard that rears its head every now and again when people write into me and complain that they don't know who the guest is, and they're annoyed with me because I didn't explain enough or provide enough backstory or ask enough questions that spelled out for that listeners' own personal edification exactly who the person they're listening to was. And the reason I think they're related is because I think the answer's the same, really. My job in this is to just try and build trust so people are comfortable opening up. And I think it seems to be working pretty well so far. I just don't think, in the context of what I'm trying to do with Looking Sideways, that interviewers taking interviewees to task leads to effective interviews, really. I mean, it can lead to gobshite presenters thinking they're far more important than the subject. I've just got no interest in doing that, really, especially having been guilty of it plenty of times over the course of my journalistic career over the years. I made a decision when I started this podcast to approach it in the way that I'm doing it, and like I said, I think it's working all well. He, of course, it was a man, made the further point that the other reason I should be doing it is because listeners are interested in what I think. To which I guess I'd answer that if people are asked, I think there's enough clues lying around the place as to what I actually think. And if you can be bothered to look for them, then fine. If not, then that's fine too. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting. And as ever, I enjoy reading every bit of correspondence I get from listeners, even the ones that are giving me shit because they don't know who the interviewees are. So keep them coming, either to podcast@wearelooking.sideways.com, or you can get over to my DMs. I nearly said slide in, and then I realised I'm 44 years of age. Over at We Look Sideways on Instagram. I'm 43. I'm 44. In 2 weeks, in fact. How the fuck did that happen? Speaking of which, of Instagram, that is, segue alert. That's kind of how sorting out a donate button came about, which is a development of recent weeks. And it came from various listener suggestions. So that's right. If you're enjoying the podcast and you want to help keep it free and ad free, you can now donate to help keep it that way. You don't have to buy any merch. You don't have to leave a review. You don't have to share it on social. You can just literally donate. Now, it wasn't my idea. This came about when listener Sven got in touch and said, I love your podcast, especially Type 2. Awesome. Keep it going. I considered buying some merch, but I think I already have too many t-shirts. Is it possible to support your podcast with a donation? Now, I thought that was A, quite nice, and B, very unusual, because it's the first time I've ever had anybody ask me if they can just donate. So as is my want, I put it up on Instagram stories and was like, hey, look at this. And pretty soon people started replying saying, well, we'd do that. And then somebody else got in touch saying, well, there's even a website where people can buy you a coffee as a nice way of donating, and you should set one of them up. So I did a poll, which I also occasionally do on Instagram, and it was 100% of people saying I should do it. So I thought, fuck it, I'll set it up and see what happens. And you know what? People started donating, which is extremely nice because it will help keep this thing that many thousands of people seem to enjoy going, and it'll keep it free and it'll keep it ad free. Now, obviously, it's a bit fucking weird, this type of thing. But then, you know what? I thought, well, I have dedicated literally tens of thousands of hours to this. And if people want to be nice and, help pay for it, then thanks. So that's what I did. I set it up. And if you want to donate, you can. The way you can do that is head over to Instagram at We Look Sideways, click the link in the bio and click donate now. I know it's a bit convoluted and it'd be a lot easier if I just said there's a button on the website, but I just haven't got around to doing that. So if I do get around to doing it, I'll talk about it here. All right, that's it. Thanks again to Jeff. Going to hold you to that Hawaii trip. I'll be back way more frequently now as I've got loads of episodes lined up. So I'll release them as I tick them off. But in the meantime, thanks for listening. Nice one. See you later.